The Senate has passed for second reading the 2025 budget proposal, but leaves the concluding work on the budget till January, when it will return from the Christmas and New Year holiday. It also referred the budget bill to its Committee on Appropriation for further legislative action. Arise correspondent Omo Bazuaye tells us more.
A day after President Bola Tinubu presented a proposed budget of 49.7 trillion naira to the National Assembly, Senate intensifies work on it as lawmakers deliberate extensively on the general principles of the proposed budget bill. The budget bill is the only item on the order paper on the day. In his lead debate, Senate Minority Leader Okoyemi Bamidele seeks support from his colleagues to pass the bill for second reading.
The 2025 budget proposal, christened Budget of Restoration, Securing Peace, Rebuilding Prosperity, strikes at the very core of the Renewed Hope agenda and demonstrates this administration's commitment to stabilizing the economy, improving lives, and repositioning our country for greater performance.
President Bola Tinubu on Wednesday presented the budget and, in a bold and ambitious move, predicated the parameters on inflation dropping from 34% to 15% and a staggering growth rate of 4.6% from 3.4%. The president also pegs the exchange rate at 1,500 naira to $1, expecting also that Nigeria's crude oil production would increase to 2.06 million barrels per day.
I applaud the deployment of 4.91 trillion naira to defense and security in order to protect the lives and property of the people and for the people to engage in meaningful economic activity, especially agriculture.
How do we drive investments when our borders, when our space is so insecure? So to this extent, the attention to defense is commendable.
Some lawmakers, however, raised a few concerns, especially about the money Nigeria plans to spend on debt service, 15.8 trillion naira, which is almost a quarter of the total expenditure of 49.7 trillion naira, the largest in Nigeria's history. But to some others, while the budget looks huge in naira terms, it is still relatively small, even by African standard, when converted to dollar.
I'd like to mention that the problem of the amount of money for debt servicing is still a source of worry to me, because that is approximately 1/3 of the total budget, 15.08 trillion for debt servicing. That is very likely going to put pressure on the available resources for capital and other needs.
At the end of the deliberation, Senate passed the budget for second reading, referring the document to its Committee on Appropriation for further legislative action. The committee has 4 weeks to complete the assignment and revert to plenary when Senate returns from Christmas and New Year holiday on the 14th of January.
A lot is expected from us in this chamber to make sure that every kobo that is being appropriated in this budget, in the 2025 budget, is spent, and our oversight functions should be carried out in such a way that the real benefits for the people of Nigeria is realized.
The 2025 budget bill comes in rather late from President Bola Tinubu, leaving lawmakers with very little time to have it passed on time to beat a December deadline and for the president to have it signed into law by the 1st of January, as it is customarily done.
Once we come back in January, we can get cracking. If there is need to call you back, in line with legislative practice, while you are on holiday, we'll do so. So don't forget that like they call it in the army, I think reservists. You are on reserve. You can be called back anytime if there is need, so that we can convene in the national interest.
The proposed 2025 budget is the second to be presented by President Bola Tinubu. Omo Bazwai, Arise News.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives Committee on Public Accounts has recommended the delisting of the National Examinations Council, NECO, University of Ibadan, and 22 departments and agencies from the 2025 budget over unaccounted funds allocated to these agencies in 2024 and the previous years. The chairman of the committee, Bamidele Salam, says that lack of discipline on the part of institutions affects the efficient implementation of Nigeria's budgetary allocations every year. Joining us now on this show to discuss the efficient implementation of Nigeria's budgetary allocations and how it will impact the economy and transform lives of citizens is Tilewa Adebajo, Chief Executive Officer of the CFG Advisory. Tilly, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Compliments of the season.
Good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Compliments of the season to you too.
Ayo and Dr. Abati.
Yeah, so they say budget of restoration, stability and securing stability and prosperity. How would this budget 2025 impact on economic growth? We have very serious problems, unemployment, inflation. From what you have read, how will it impact on economic growth? And given the concern raised by Senator Akubundu in that footage that was shown, that report that was shown, he says debt service is about a third of the budget.
32%.
32% of the budget. So if you are going to spend almost 16 trillion to service debt, and if you add that together, it's not up to what has been allocated for education, health, and some other strategic aspects. So we make the money, we use it to pay debt, or we borrow, we add to revenue, we pay debt. So how would this budget impact economic growth?
Thank you very much for that very important question. I think, first of all, let us take a look at the pros and cons of the budget. One of the most important things for me that people are not highlighting on this budget is that for the first time in a long time, there's no allocation for fuel subsidies. And I think that that is something that for me is very important. It is taking us over a year and a half. This government will be in February next year, which is just a month away. It would have been 2 years since this government was elected. There has been a hard road of putting the cart before the horse in terms of the whole issue of subsidy removal, foreign exchange liberalization. It's been a long, hard road that was not necessary. So at least we've come to a point where the $10 to $15 billion a year we used to see in the budget towards subsidy is no longer in the budget. So the question now is that the savings that we have made from those subsidies, how are we applying them to the growth and development of the country? And like you've said, there are still serious issues that are affecting the Nigerian economy. One of the most important issues for me, which we do not talk about much, is unemployment. The unemployment data is 4%, which for me is very unrealistic. And I think we need to look at that. How do we grow the economy? We're still in stagflation. And we understand that for us to grow this economy with 200 million people, we're looking at a minimum of 8 to 10% GDP growth on a sustainable basis. Our current levels of GDP growth at 3.24% is not going to resolve that problem. It's not going to shift the needle, as you've seen. So there are a lot of serious reforms that we need to take in terms of structural reforms of the economy to help us as to how we're going to move this economy forward and grow the Nigerian economy. Now, as this budget, as you've said, one of the cons of this budget also is the fact that we have now replaced the subsidy with debt service, unfortunately. So if you take a look at the quantum of debt service, is actually 16.327 trillion. That's the total debt service. Half of that is domestic and half of that is foreign. So if you take a look at the total of that, using the 150 to 1, that's about $10 billion in debt service. Half of that being domestic, and of course, as said earlier, 32% of your budget. I think Rotus made some calculations yesterday that he calculated education, at health, infrastructure, and defense and security. The total of all those line items, which are very critical, is only 14 trillion. Meanwhile, the debt service is 16.327. The recurrent expenditure is only 14 trillion, which is about $9 billion. Debt service is 16.32 trillion. Capital expenditure, 14.8. Debt service, 16.3. And of course, unfortunately also, we have a deficit financing for this budget of another 13.8 trillion. So if you look at the carryover of the deficit financings from previous budgets from this administration, we're looking at close to 20 to 25 trillion in terms of deficit financing. So it's important that we need to restructure the balance sheet of the federal government. So while we have come across with this budget, the pronouncements on inflation and all those things are also there. So it is important that the reforms now have to be at the fiscal level. We have a central bank now that is focused, a central bank, an institution that has now been rebuilt. The current governor, Mr. Olayemi Cardozo, I believe, has restored confidence to that institution.
A central bank that has not published its accounts?
Well, the accounts of the central bank, I believe, should be ready. I don't know the details of their accounts, but that is something that we're waiting for. But in terms of, because, there were challenges with the MFLA account that KPMG did initially. So we're looking forward to them releasing their 2023 accounts. But eventually, I think what is important that the central bank has done is that the monetary policy pronouncements have been solid and have been data-driven. We now have a foreign exchange system that is transparent. And right now, what we're looking for in the market now is price discovery. And we have a situation in the central bank now whereby the monetary policy people are looking at the data. Yes, they looked at inflation at 24% this year. This was their target. But because things were not happening on the fiscal side, they continue to increase rates. So the pronouncement of the government that they want to get inflation to 15% is something that will have to wait until the next monetary policy for us to see. But overall, I believe that what needs to be done now is that there needs to be proper coordination because, the Ministry of Finance have also been successful in financing debt, but we've reached the headroom. So it is important now that the government restructures its balance sheet based on what we're seeing in 16 trillion of debt service. It's time for them to sell down assets. And as I've said before, by selling down some of these JV assets, we can raise between $35 to $50 billion to be able to help us restructure the federal government's balance sheet. So my point is that the job has been done on the monetary policy side. We have seen increase in the reserves, but not only in the quality, but also the quantity of the reserves. So right now, on the fiscal side, we need that restructuring. Asset sales need to happen. And we've seen some positive signs. The Renaissance Shell deal has been approved. Seplat has been approved. Shell has also been approved. Shell is also going to Bonga North. And you can see that there's confidence within the oil sector returning to boost production. A new bid of license rounds was just been announced. And I think if the government should continue along those momentum by selling down some of these JV assets to raise money, we can begin to think about within the next year and a half to look at oil production at close to 2.5 million barrels. But more importantly, I think what is more important is the gas. Because the biggest project we have in Nigeria today is LNG, which is an $8 billion investment. But unfortunately, LNG as it is today, which is a goose that lays the golden eggs, is only able to secure supply of gas for 50% of its operations. So it's only operating at 50% capacity. So we need to boost production of gas in all these fields to be able to supply not only LNG, but to develop Train 8 and all other investments. So the whole essence now is not so much the budget, but getting the policies right to be able to help us grow the economy.